Your Honor, she is a bitter, jealous woman. The lawyer's voice, slick with manufactured contempt, echoed in the sterile courtroom. She has no home, no money, and no future. I just sat there in the gallery, my hands folded in my lap. I kept my face a perfect, impassive mask. Beside me, I could feel my older sister Chloe smirking. She was the golden child, after all, the one who had done everything right. The judge sighed, looking utterly annoyed by the entire proceeding, until the heavy main doors swung open. 2 men in dark severe suits entered, flashing badges to the bailiff. I knew them. The judge was handed a file, and as he read it, his eyes went wide. His entire demeanor, once bored and dismissive, snapped to sharp, sudden attention. He looked up, his gaze passing right over the lawyer, and found me in the gallery. "Ms. Hayes," he said, his voice now laced with a deference that silenced the room. "Is the government's entire asset forfeiture task force present?" I watched the blood drain from the lawyer's face. His name was Mr. Vance, and he had just made the biggest mistake of his career. It all started 3 weeks earlier, at one of those tense family dinners in a restaurant far too expensive for my taste. The entire event was, ostensibly, to support Chloe during her messy divorce. Chloe, my older sister, the woman who had never let me forget she'd married up while I'd settled for a boring government job. Her husband Mark wasn't there, but the ghost of his charm and wealth, the qualities my parents adored, filled every empty chair. The star of the show, however, was Mr. Vance. He was Chloe's high-powered attorney, a man who radiated so much arrogance he practically vibrated. He'd dismissed me with a single glance the moment I sat down. Chloe was complaining about the cost of freedom, dabbing at her eyes with a silk handkerchief. Vance leaned in, patting her hand. "Don't you worry," he said, his voice loud enough for me to hear. He glanced at me with a pitying sneer. "Anna, it's sweet you want to help, but your sister's legal fund probably exceeds your entire annual salary." He chuckled. "You just stick to your little government cubicle. We'll handle the real high-stakes finance." My parents nodded, a familiar, sad agreement on their faces. Good, steady work. I could hear my father's voice in my head. I just took a slow sip of water. It was the same old story. The same dismissal I'd felt when they praised her for marrying Mark, the same dismissal I'd felt when I tried to explain what my job actually was. As Vance continued his monologue, he slid a file across the table to Chloe. "Just a formality," he said. "Mark's asset declaration?" My eyes flicked to the paper and my breath caught. It was just for a second, but I saw it. A name. A specific shell corporation. My heart didn't just beat, it thudded. It wasn't just Humane name. It was Untanane name. The linchpin of an active, high-level federal investigation. My investigation, he chuckled, thinking I was just the irrelevant little sister. He had no idea he'd just belittled me, and flashed the key to a multi-million-dollar money laundering operation in front of the one person in the country paid to dismantle it. To understand the reckoning that followed, you have to understand the 2 lives I was living. I remember last Thanksgiving, Chloe was holding court in the kitchen, receiving endless praise for, I think it was a new centerpiece. My mother just couldn't get over the shade of the cranberries. I was standing near my father, who was watching the game. I tried to make conversation, tried to connect. "I got transferred to a new unit at work, Dad," I said, trying to sound casual. He didn't even look away from the TV. He patted my head. Actually patted my head, like I was a golden retriever. "That's nice, honey," he said, his eyes on the screen. "Still shuffling paper for the feds? Good, steady work. It's important." I could hear the subtext I'd been hearing my entire life. Not everyone can be a high flyer like Mark. He didn't have to say it. That was my role. I was agent paper pusher, reliable, quiet, and completely uninteresting. It was the exact same pat on the head I got when I graduated with honors. While Chloe got a brand new car just for passing her real estate exam, the weight of it was so familiar, so heavy. I just nodded and went to help with the dishes. That's what I always did. My father pictured me in a gray, windowless cubicle under flickering fluorescent lights, probably in a basement somewhere. The reality was, Different. 3 o'clock in the morning, just 12 hours after that disastrous dinner with Vance, I was in a place my family couldn't even imagine. A SCIF, a sensitive compartmented information facility. It's basically a steel-reinforced box, windowless and soundproof, where you can't bring in so much as a cell phone for fear of surveillance. At the head of a massive conference table, surrounded by the cool glow of encrypted monitors, I was the one in charge. With me was my boss, Section Chief Harris, a no-nonsense man from the DOJ who didn't care about my family name or who my sister married. He cared about my analysis, and only my analysis. He looked tired, his tie undone, but his eyes were sharp. He pointed to the screen, his expression grim. "You're sure?" he asked. His voice was quiet, but it filled the room. I pointed to a complex flowchart that looked like a spider's web of offshore accounts. "I'm positive," I said, my voice steady. "Mark isn't just hiding assets from Chloe. He's the primary launderer for the K&R cartel. We've been tracking his Nassar stripping operation for 6 months." I zoomed in on one node of the chart, one single entity. "He's using a nested shell structure PMOVs to move sanctioned goods, and this name." I tapped the screen, and the exact name Vance had so arrogantly flashed at the restaurant filled the monitor. "This is his clean holding company. This is the linchpin. Vance just confirmed it for me." Harris leaned back, running a hand over his face. "This is it then." His voice was low. "This is Operation Gilded Cage. U.S. Attorney is ready to move, but only on your signal, Hayes." He looked me right in the eye. "You're the lead investigator. You've built this entire case from nothing for over a year. You call the shot." There was no condescension. There was no, "That's nice, honey." There was just the heavy, cold weight of absolute responsibility. My word, and mine alone, would set the entire machine in motion. It was almost funny, in a dark, twisted way. My family thought my job was filing TPS reports. They pictured me stamping forms and organizing manila folders, getting excited about a new stapler. In reality, I was the only thing standing between Chloe's high flyer husband and his escape with enough illicit cash to buy a small country. My little government cubicle was actually the command center for an operation that was about to freeze $80 million in assets. And his lawyer, his arrogant, dismissive lawyer, he hadn't just insulted me. He had threatened my investigation. He had confirmed my target and proven his own complicity in the same stupid, arrogant breath. For years, I had built a firewall between my two worlds. I let them have Agent Paper Pusher. I let them pat my head and praise Chloe's centerpieces. It was just easier. But when Vance decided to make me a target in that courtroom, he didn't just insult me, he threatened an active federal case. He was about to learn that Agent Paper Pusher had a very, very different job title. That night, sitting in my apartment, the familiar dull sting of his words faded. It was replaced by something else entirely. A cold, sharp, and absolute clarity. Vance wasn't just an arrogant fool running his mouth to impress my sister. He knew. He knew that Shell Company was fraudulent, and he was actively helping Mark hide it from the divorce proceedings. This wasn't just unethical lawyering. This was criminal. He was committing obstruction of justice and conspiracy to launder money, right in front of me. The sheer audacity of it, dismissing me as a paper pusher while literally committing a federal crime. It was breathtaking. I didn't call my sister. I didn't text my parents. I didn't do anything emotional. Emotion was a liability. It was their world, not mine. Instead, at dawn, I was in Section Chief Harris's office, my hands wrapped around a cup of burnt black coffee. I laid it out for him, clean and simple. Vance is using the divorce hearing to legitimize a fraudulent asset declaration, I explained, my voice perfectly level. He's going to present falsified affidavits in open court. He's not just representing a client anymore, sir. He's become part of the conspiracy. Harris listened, his face like stone. He didn't interrupt, just let the silence hang in the air after I finished. Then he leaned forward, and a slow, grim smile touched his lips. "Obstruction," he said, the word sounding final. "He's knowingly obstructing in Title 18. U.S. Code SS 1512-1000. He's not just Mark's lawyer anymore, Hayes. He's your co-conspirator. He stood up, pacing to the window. This is it. This is how we get them both, clean and undeniable. We can move on him. And Mark at the same time. The plan was simple. It was surgical. We would let the divorce hearing proceed. I would be there, just as planned, sitting in the gallery as the dutiful, invisible sister. Vance, drowning in his own arrogance, would stand before the judge. He would present his false evidence. He would hand those fraudulent documents, the ones hiding millions, directly to the court. The moment he did, the moment those papers were officially submitted as truth, he would be committing a fresh felony, live and on the record. Harris agreed to stage his best team, the men in suits I'd worked with before, in the courthouse cafeteria. They would just be sipping coffee, blending in, waiting. They wouldn't move until they got my text. It wouldn't be an emotional plea or a panicked message. It would be a simple procedural code. Just one word, execute. The warrants were signed. The essay was briefed. The agents were staged. Vance was preparing to argue about a beach house and alimony. He had no idea he was about to be served with a federal indictment, courtesy of the paper pusher in the back row. We were back in the courtroom. The air was thick and stale. I sat in the gallery, my posture perfect, my hands steady. Across the way, Mark was there this time, sitting next to Chloe and Vance. He looked bored, wealthy, and completely untouchable. Chloe just looked nervous, twisting a ring on her finger. Vance, however, looked like he was about to step onto a stage. This was his arena, and he was the star. The judge called for preliminary statements on asset disclosure. Vance stood up, smoothing his $1,000 suit. This was his moment. Your Honor, he began, his voice dripping with false concern. Before we begin, I must address the unprofessional interference of the petitioner's sister, Miss Anna Hayes. My stomach didn't lurch. My heart didn't pound. I just waited. She is a disgruntled, low-level government clerk, he continued, pointing right at me. He was performing for the judge, for Chloe, for everyone. She is clearly jealous of her sister's success and has been harassing my client and attempting to poison this case with wild, baseless accusations. He leaned forward, his face a mask of sincerity. Your Honor, she is a bitter, jealous woman. She has no home, no money, and no future. I formally request she be barred from these proceedings. The words just hung there. My sister Chloe actually nodded in agreement. Mark smirked. Under the polished wooden bench, hidden from view, I slowly took out my phone. My fingers were steady. I typed one single, simple word. Execute. I hit send. As Vance gave the judge a self-satisfied smile, basking in the glow of his own performance, the main courtroom doors swung open. He didn't even notice. Section Chief Harris entered, flanked by the two agents. They were quiet, professional, and their presence sucked all the air out of the room. They handed the file directly to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. The judge opened it. He read the first page. His face, which had been bored and annoyed, went pale. He looked up, his gaze snapping past Vance, past everyone, and landing directly on me. Mr. Vance, the judge said, his voice now a cold, sharp blade. I suggest you sit down. Vance's smile faltered. Your Honor? The judge ignored him, his eyes still locked on me in the gallery. Miss Hayes? I presume your team is here to execute a warrant 24 CR 881%. The entire room went silent. Chloe's jaw dropped. Mark's lazy smile evaporated. He sat bolt upright. Vance spun around, his face a mask of utter confusion. Ms. Hayes? He sputtered, looking at me as if he'd never seen me before. What is this? What's going on? I stood up slowly. I didn't look at Chloe. I didn't look at Mark. I looked directly at my boss. My voice was calm and clear. Section Chief, I said. Please proceed. Harris nodded, a curt, professional gesture. The agents stepped forward, one moving toward Vance, the other toward Mark. David Vance, Harris's voice boomed in the silent room. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit money laundering and obstruction of justice." The agent was already pulling Vance's hands behind his back. "Mark Jensen," Harris continued, as the second agent cuffed him, "you are under arrest for violations of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act and multiple counts of wire fraud." The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was the loudest sound I had ever heard. Chloe let out a small, strangled cry. Mark was just staring, his face white with shock. "But, Vance..." Vance looked at me. His face was ashen. He finally understood. "You..." he whispered, his voice cracking, the arrogance completely gone. "Agent Paper Pusher? Your Operation Gilded Cage?" My sister had spent our entire lives looking down on me, certain of her place in the world. In the end, it only took one federal indictment for her to finally watch that world burn to the ground. The courtroom erupted. The moment the doors closed behind them, it was like a dam of silence broke, and the room was flooded with noise. Reporters I hadn't even noticed were suddenly on their feet, shouting questions. Flashes from cameras lit up the room, catching the stunned, tear-streaked face of my sister. Vance and Mark were already in the hallway, being escorted, the press swarming them in a classic perp walk. "Vance?" He looked hollow, his arrogance completely shattered, replaced by a gray, sickly fear. Mark just looked confused, as if he'd woken up in a language he didn't speak, utterly unable to comprehend a world where his charm and money hadn't saved him. I looked at Chloe. She was still sitting at the defense table, but she had collapsed. Her head was in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. She was completely, utterly alone. All her assets, which were really just Mark's assets, were frozen. Her husband, her high flyer, was gone. Her entire world, the one she had held over my head for my entire life, had been dismantled in less than 10 minutes. I stood there, watching this hurricane of consequences, and the strangest thing happened. I felt nothing, not triumph, not joy, not even pity, just a profound, cold quiet. I turned, my footsteps making no sound on the marble floor, and walked right past her. I didn't say a word. Section Chief Harris was waiting for me at the door. He held it open, his face grim but satisfied. "Good work, Hayes," he said, his voice low. "Let's go brief the director." And just like that, I left my old life behind and walked back into my real one. 6 months later, the world felt different. My little government cubicle, the one my father always pictured, was a distant memory. Now I was in a large glass-walled corner office with a panoramic view of the city skyline. The small polished gold plaque on the door didn't say Agent Paper Pusher. It said, "Section Chief Hayes, Asset Forfeiture and Financial Crimes." I was at the head of my own conference table, leading a briefing for my own team. They were a group of brilliant, focused analysts who didn't care who my sister married or what my father thought. They cared about my analysis, my decisions. There was no condescension here, no pats on the head, just respect. It was a quiet, steady, professional environment. It felt more like home than my parents' house ever had. A news report was playing quietly on a flat screen in the corner of my office. I was only half listening as I reviewed a new file, but the words were crisp and final. "Disgraced attorney David Vance was formally disbarred today," the anchor said, and was sentenced to 36 months in federal prison for his role in the conspiracy. My eyes flicked to the screen. His client, businessman Mark Jensen, faces 15 years for violations of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. The anchor continued, "A scheme uncovered and dismantled by Operation Gilded Cage, an investigation headed by FinCEN Section Chief Anna Hayes, which has, to date, seized over $80 million in illicit assets." My name, they said, in my wine dame. Not as a footnote, not as Chloe's sister, but as the one who led the entire thing. Just as the report ended, an email notification popped up on my screen. My heart didn't even beat faster. The sender, Chloe. The subject line was just one word, "please," followed by, "I had no idea." I clicked it, not out of anxiety, but out of a distant academic curiosity. The first line was a jumble of pure panic. "Anna, please, you have to help me. They took everything. Mark, the houses. I have nothing. I'm staying with Mom and Dad." It went on and on. A long, rambling, desperate plea for help. For money. She needed money from me. The paper pusher with no home and no future. I read the words, and I thought about the beat-up second-hand laptop I'd had to use all through grad school because money was tight for my parents. I thought about the endless student loans I was still methodically paying off, while Mark bought Chloe a new Mercedes just for her birthday, a party my parents had insisted I fly home for, on my own dime. I thought about all the holidays I'd spent listening to them praise her high-flyer life while I was quietly working in a skiff at 3 a.m., building the very case that would one day take it all away. I looked at her message, this digital plea from a world that felt like it was a million miles away on another planet. And all I felt was a faint, distant pity, not anger, not a desire for revenge, just peace, a profound sense of closure. My peace was no longer dependent on their apology. My validation was no longer tied to their approval. I was finally, truly, free of it. I took a slow sip of my coffee. It was hot, and strong, and real. My team was waiting for my decision on the new case file. They were my new family, my true one founded on mutual respect and proven competence, not on dysfunctional obligation. I moved my mouse over Chloe's email. I didn't reply. I didn't hesitate. I just clicked archive. I turned back to my team, a small, genuine smile on my face. "All right," I said. "Let's get to work." My family only ever saw the me they wanted to see, no home, no money, and no future. They just never realized in my world I was the one who decided who had all three. If you've ever been underestimated by the people who are supposed to know you best, share your story in the comments below. In this community, we always check the receipts.